Hey there, folks. Welcome to yesterday's news for September 19th, 2018. I'm going to try to go quick because I have memory storage issues going on my phone, so I may get cut off. So, today's stories all are somewhat peripherally connected to guns, and I apologize if you think I talk about guns too much, but they're interesting, and both philosophically and technologically, and they're often in the news. So, anyways, first story, not really actually all that gun-related, but the founder of Defense Distributed, the company famous for 3D printed guns, is currently under an arrest warrant for having sex with a minor and paying her. Yeah. Most of the time when you have a politically controversial figure who's accused of something, I usually, kind of look for a higher burden of proof, but in this case it looks like they definitely have a high standard of proof. They basically have him on video going into a hotel room with an underage girl. So, yeah, looks like he did it. And he fled the country, so that's another kind of indication of guilt. Not always, but that would have to be a pretty serious conspiracy because they do, in fact, have him on camera going into a hotel room with an underage girl and not coming out for quite a while. So, yeah, I hope to catch him. He was last seen in Taiwan and did not take his scheduled flight home, so we don't know where he is at the moment. He could have fled somewhere else, Taiwan being an island nation and kind of in a nearby some not super well-governed parts of the world. He could have taken a boat to anywhere from there. So hopefully they find him and bring him to justice. As far as Defense Distributed is concerned, I like the idea of making bad ideas obsolete. And so, to the extent that what they're doing is making gun control obsolete, I think that's cool. We'll see what happens. Hopefully somebody who is not a pedophile will take control of the company and continue what they're doing. At least Cody Wilson is out, and for good reason, and hopefully they catch him and that we can have an end to that story. So the other story is actually two stories, and it is two separate failed mass shooting incidents in one day, and both were remarkably similar in that in both incidents the shooter was the only fatality. Both incidents were between 3 and 4 people injured other than the shooter, and I'm not sure if it's 3 or 4 in either case because there's multiple stories that quote different numbers. So, but in that ballpark, between the two of them, I believe there is one person who is actually in critical condition. So that is, not a total... still a serious incident, but it was not a multiple fatality kind of situation, so that is good. And in both cases, the shooter was in fact stopped by police officers. In the one incident, it was at a courthouse in Pennsylvania, and there was a police officer on duty at the courthouse. The shooter showed up and shot the cop first. Luckily, he did not produce a substantial wound, and the police officer was able to duck behind cover and return fire fairly quickly, ending the incident with very few injuries, and again, the only fatality being the shooter. This kind of feeds into that perennial debate among the gun community of open carry versus concealed carry. This is an incident where, yes, indeed, the bad guy did target the guy with the gun. So if you open carry, think about that. The deterrent aspect of it really only works if there's a lot of people doing it. If you're the only one, it just makes you the target. So keep that in mind. So unless you're participating in some sort of demonstration, I do not recommend open carry. And I also would tend to think that open carry is not the best protest method, because it kind of freaks people out, and that's not what we want to do. So enough of that story, and onto the other story. Was in an office building in Wisconsin. It looked like some sort of engineering firm, and looks like the shooter was a disgruntled employee. They actually didn't describe him as disgruntled, but he showed up and shot his coworkers, so probably disgruntled on some level. And in that situation, the police were actually called to the scene and managed to show up fast enough to actually neutralize the threat before anybody else was killed. So that is pretty cool and pretty good. And so I'd be very interested to see the details as they come out. Right now, it just happened today, so there's very few details available, but I'd be very interested to see the further details on that, see if there is something that they did right there that we can kind of spread around to other police departments, because if you can get that response time down, you can save lives. Now, I am an advocate for having a response time measured in seconds and not minutes, which is why I'm an advocate for concealed carry. And so, in both these cases, while it was in fact a police officer that did the shooting to stop the bad guy, it could have been somebody else who was present. Now, granted, you're typically not allowed to carry in a courthouse, but there's also typically armed security in courthouse. But office building, if you are allowed per the location's rules and local regulations, etc. If there had been somebody on scene who was already armed, it could have cut that time down even further and reduced the casualties even further. In this case, there was no fatalities, but several people were injured. So, a gunshot wound, even if you survive it, is still a pretty big deal. So if you can, if we can cut those timelines down, it is very, very positive. So if you are of sound mind and good moral character, and you live in a state that makes it reasonably accessible, go get whatever training is necessary, and maybe a little beyond that if you have the time and money, and get yourself a gun and carry a concealed carry permit. Get that first before you carry, unless you're in one of the states that doesn't require it. Excuse me. In which case, you should still seek training and know what you're doing, be competent with your firearm, and familiar with all local laws, etc., that govern the use of force in self-defense, because you will need to know that. So, but it is something that is within reach of just about anybody. There's a lot of work to do, a lot of stuff to know, skills to build, but it's not. You don't have to be John Wick. You can pretty average. The average person can do it without too much difficulty. So I am going to continue my coughing fit off camera, and hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. And if you did, like, share, subscribe, etc. And I will see you tomorrow.